Do these girls know? They said they are coming up. Too many. Beyond. Enough is enough. I mean, there's a limit. Just quiet. That's all. Very, very difficult. Every day, this entire week, I'm simply sending worksheets, setting work. I told my technology students to log into the symposium. I told them, okay. I don't think Vinodini is doing, no? For bio, you're saying? Because Sonia, that was given responsibility yesterday? Yes. You're written Vinodini. No. Or to inform the 3 students. Okay. Okay. Even those are logging. I think it's RT. There's a lot of miscommunication that's happening. That is usually happens because of all these lost. I have a lot of it lost. No problem. Come. Where are your friends? Good morning. Friends, I met Alicia. Come this side. She said, yeah, everything is ready. She was like confused about the link. I said, today I was dance at the link. So she said, she can just go to it. She said she's added on the PPT, but just first 5 pages kind of thing. See if you can open that. Okay.
So there's one update. Nikki was supposed to be the second half MC, but she has a flu. So she said her voice will be cracking. So Anhata is our data.
Okay. Nikki.
You won't be able to connect to the Zoom, right? Sure? Try.
How will you be able to?
That's what. Just try because now.
Students won't be able to connect.
Try quickly.
Okay, maybe you'll have to give us access.
Everything is there to get on their laptop.
So anyway, I will be promoting them. But the thing is, they have to join. Just give first seat. Otherwise, we have to start transferring stuff.
Okay.
Why did this decision happen? I really don't know.
Out of the blue, on
Yeah.
their own without faculty.
Check. You do first.
So why is calling us?
No.
Are you in classes? Just check. The link I sent on the group.
There is. That's why we are sitting here.
Smart learning. Or use your mobile data if you're not able to access. It's not connected to some reason. You need to access it. Should I give it to you? It's better with that. You guys will agree for that. Come on, give us a meeting ID and password.
It's just a link. There's no password to it. You just have to click.
There's no password.
Just click on it. That's it.
Because I clicked on it, it's not loading. So maybe I can try opening.
What does it say?
No connection.
The ID is there, 944-386. Right now,
Yeah, yes, ma'am. You are the host. So.
I'll try connecting my hotspot.
yeah, it will connect to your hotspot, but not to school Wi-Fi.
Oh, no wonder. It's not loading.
You have hotspot?
Oh, my hotspot is working. Link it.
Then it's not working with you, it's connected. I'm connected.
No, I'm joining the meeting.
I muted my.
So it's connected for me.
Yeah. I disconnected my audio as of now.
Lisa, is it working for you?
It's working? Are you connected?
Are you in the meeting?
Okay, what's the next course of action now?
We have the script. I was planning I'll access to the Zoom and I can just read through the script. on
Yeah,
my
I know
laptop.
that, correct.
So maybe
But we need the presentation, right?
Yeah, so Elisha was supposed to project the presentation. And
You are first
I'm
get
just
connected.
checking one more time if the video is clear. The
So you guys do hotspot with that.
Let me,
no, my God. That wasn't working for me. Let me try it again. This is a joining meeting.
It doesn't show you, Melissa. Where have you joined?
No, it's not loading.
So if you keep showing it's loading.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay, let's do one thing. I have is this the PPT, the final PPT that we are looking at? This is the one?
Yes,
Okay, fine. Where are the videos?
videos are with Elisha.
Yeah, so
I
how are
have
you going
the-
to send it to me?
I can email it to you now. Can I email it to you?
Okay, email it to me. Let me see if I can play from here.
Or should I WhatsApp? Which
No,
one
don't do
is
WhatsApp,
easier?
just email.
Okay. Just give me a minute. There is no password. There is password.
No, you do this. Oh, Gayatri.s.
Oh, that's it. I'll just WhatsApp just in case. Did you see?
If you share, no.
Can
you airdrop?
I have shared the link on your email, actually, the Mr.
No, I sent to David one to your email also long ago. So you can check your previous email. So the Bisaka one mom sent and I sent to David and Priyanka.
This is
Yes,
the one.
yes.
Okay.
It's on Drive. So you can save it on your Mac or sorry, iPad.
This is the video, right?
Yeah.
So how do I save this now? Tell me.
Send the copy. Okay, I'll add it to your Drive. So open it. Ma'am, Anu is asking what's the password for the
There
link?
isn't a password. It's an open link.
Are they
Just
able to
that.
access it? They're not able to access it on the.
There is no password. It's just a direct link.
How should we, postpone it to 12?
No,
Cannot?
no. We'll make do with this.
Can we?
No postponement. Put it on drive.
You want a hotspot? Quickly, you won't be able to access. I'm telling you again and again.
Oh, there is no Wi-Fi.
Got it?
Yeah, sorry,
Great.
there's no password. So now,
So she has everything on her system?
no, we can download it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Do it.
Can you use, one of you use my hotspot, not all of you, one of you use my hotspot. See if you're getting it. You should.
Now, what's the name?
It is purely right one, I guess. Only one of you. Come on.
I don't worry, we will finish the 6, 6,
Yeah,
7, 6.
yeah, correct.
Connected.
So just text Zoom quickly.
Oh, it shows not connected.
Okay, this one is downloaded to my drive. Presentation is there. First video is there. Second video, tell me.
Second video also, ma'am, Shivani ma'am sent it to email. Really satisfied? You can download everything. I'll WhatsApp it to you. Yeah. Nisha, can you forward whatever I sent you to?
You can use my phone is still showing this, you know how to use that.
Yes, ma'am.
You want to use it.
The one you sent me. Don't use the very big one. The one after that is the one of the content. I'm using the one. Are you able to open and try and report it? Yeah, another is connected right. Okay. Let me try again. But why is this not a normal meeting ID? Like,
See, there are different categories for different types of programs. Okay. So if it is an outside program where externals are involved, when we have audience as external or other GIIS, then the format is different.
Okay.
This one is created internally because we don't have any externals here.
Okay.
So, it's based on the importance given to every event. Do you want to download? Yes, I want to download. Where did it go after downloading?
It's probably good.
Okay, so it is getting downloaded. So this also then we'll save to the drive. So in case something goes wrong there, I have everything there.
Okay. It's okay? Still all okay. Yeah, I'm joined accidentally. But I think I'll have to just script from your
impacts are often felt unevenly across the world.
Use yourself or diffuse your volume. Good morning, everyone. We'll Good morning to one and all present here. Good morning to one and all present here. A very warm welcome to the very first virtual symposium organized by the GIIS Youth Climate Action Club of Global Indian International School. As a part of STEAM Week celebrations, where we integrate science, technology, entrepreneurship, arts, and maths, we are extremely happy to welcome our eminent speakers from various fields in science and technology, who have graciously agreed to be here with us this day. This is so students from grade 11 could get the opportunity to listen to them, learn about their respective fields of study and research, and also get to interact with them. Today, GIIS Youth for Climate Action is proud to organize a virtual symposium with guest speakers as Mr. David and Ms. Priya, who although were unable to join us live, have sent in a joint minute video discussing the furthering of machine learning applications to tackle climate crisis. We also have GIIS alumnus, Ms. Lakshmi Aragappa, who will be discussing about her academic journey and an interdisciplinary approach to research. Thirdly, we have Mr. Chandra Kumar, the founder of several startup ventures to create a better digital future for organizations. And last but not the least, we have Ms. Bisaka Das, another GIIS alumnus, who will talk about her academic journey at McGill University and Miller, and is a co-founder and chair of the Climate Change AI Initiative. Mr. David served as NSF Mathematical Sciences postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Pennsylvania after receiving his PhD from MIT in applied mathematics. He is a former Fulbright scholar and NSF graduate research fellow. Ms. Priya Donti is a PhD student in computer science and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University and a US Department of Energy Computational Research graduate fellow. She is also a co-founder and chair of Climate Change AI. Her research lies at the intersection of machine learning, electric power systems, and climate change mitigation. We now have the video.
Hi, my name is Priya Donti.
And I'm David Rolnick.
Thanks so much for having us today. So, I don't necessarily need to convince this audience that climate change is a huge problem. In particular, as the extent of climate change increases, it has increasingly severe effects in terms of storms, droughts, fires, flooding, etc. And these impacts are often felt unevenly across the world. And in particular, the world's most disadvantaged populations are the ones that tend to feel the brunt of climate change impacts. One issue exacerbating this is that we don't necessarily know how quickly climate change will accelerate. And this is largely due to the phenomenon of feedback. So as we have some amount of warming, this causes things like the ice melting, and as a result, the amount of reflectivity of sunlight Hi, my name is Priya Donti.
And I'm David Rolnick.
Thanks so much for having us today. So I don't necessarily need to convince this audience that climate change is a huge problem. In particular, as the extent of climate change increases, it has increasingly severe effects in terms of storms, droughts, fires, flooding, etc. And these impacts are often felt unevenly across the world. And in particular, the world's most disadvantaged populations are the ones that tend to feel the brunt of climate change impacts. One issue exacerbating this is that we don't necessarily know how quickly climate change will accelerate. And this is largely due to the phenomenon of feedback. So as we have some amount of warming, this causes things like the ice melting, and as a result, the amount of reflectivity of sunlight into the atmosphere, or albedo, going down. And this warming, as a result, causes more warming, and we're not necessarily sure to the extent to which this will occur, but this could accelerate the extent of climate change. And as a result, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has mentioned that we need net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 in order to avert some of the worst effects of climate change. But a problem is that emissions are still increasing year after year. There's been a slight dip in emissions due to COVID. I don't necessarily need to convince this audience that climate change is Hi, my name is Priya Donti.
And I'm David Rolnick.
Thanks so much for having us today. So I don't necessarily need to convince this audience that climate change is a huge problem. In particular, as the extent of climate change increases, it has increasingly severe effects in terms of storms, droughts, fires, flooding, etc. And these impacts are often felt unevenly across the world. And in particular, the world's most disadvantaged populations are the ones that tend to feel the brunt of climate change impacts. One issue exacerbating this is that we don't necessarily know how quickly climate change will accelerate. And this is largely due to the phenomenon of feedback. So as we have some amount of warming, this causes things like the ice melting, and as a result, the amount of reflectivity of sunlight into the atmosphere, or albedo, going down. And this warming, as a result, causes more warming, and we're not necessarily sure to the extent to which this will occur, but this could accelerate the extent of climate change. And as a result, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has mentioned that we need net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 in order to avert some of the worst effects of climate change. But a problem is that emissions are still increasing year after year. There's been a slight dip in emissions due to COVID, but it is expected that emissions will actually rebound and potentially even increase at a larger rate after COVID. And so this is still a problem that we continue to face today. So one question that often gets asked is, where exactly do these emissions come from? And so this is a chart from the World Resources Institute that shows the greenhouse gas emissions, their sources and types in 2016. So in the first column, you see the sector from which greenhouse gas emissions are coming. So for instance, transportation causes 16% of greenhouse gas emissions, agriculture causes 12%, and you'll see that there are very many sectors that actually contribute here. And they produce, these sectors correspond to different end uses or activities. So for example, residential buildings are responsible for some amount of greenhouse gas emissions, or the production of cement, for example, is 3%. And so the one difficulty that comes with this is that the problem of climate change is very distributed. There isn't necessarily one action you can take or one sector you can make changes in that will actually solve the problem of climate change. But on the other hand, this is potentially an opportunity for those who would like to get involved in solving this problem, in that there are many ways to have an impact, many places to get involved. So in particular, there are a couple of classes of ways that are often discussed for what it means to tackle climate change. And one kind of overarching theme here is that climate change isn't an on-off switch. So often I'm asked, is it too late to tackle climate change? And the answer is yes and no, in the sense that we are going to experience some of the most severe effects now, but we also have a choice, in that if we choose to take rapid action to reduce the extent to which we emit greenhouse gas emissions, then we can sort of reduce the, we can control the amount of climate change effects that we will indeed experience. And so in particular, the kinds of climate action we can take are broken into two classes here, one of which is mitigation. How much can we reduce the extent to which we are actually emitting greenhouse gas emissions? And then adaptation. For the effects that we will end up experiencing, how do we build resilience to those consequences of climate change? So this is sort of the brief overview of climate change, but then what does it have to do with machine learning? So before diving into that question, I'm first going to step back and describe what machine learning actually is. So machine learning is a term that is often used in the media, and I think causes a lot of terror in a lot of people, but actually it's really quite simple. Machine learning is just a group of techniques that automatically extract patterns from data, and usually large amounts of data. And in some sense, really, it's that simple. That said, there are actually many different classes of machine learning, many different kinds of techniques that are used here, and some common terms that are used in the media, for example. And so I'm just going to go through briefly what some of those common terms are. So one of these is deep learning, which is a class of techniques that's loosely inspired by the artificial neural networks we have in our brains. Reinforcement learning, which is the idea that we want to optimize some actor, some agent to maximize some reward in some kind of environment. So for example, a canonical example is a robot navigating in a maze. How can this robot better navigate this maze? Computer vision, so a group of techniques that works with images and videos, so things like trying to understand what's going on in satellite imagery, or trying to figure out whether a particular image is a dog or a cat. And then finally, natural language processing, so a class of techniques that deals with human language, things like how can you automatically extract meaning from a text, or how can you respond to somebody who's asking you a question. So machine learning is, again, just a group of techniques that is extracting patterns from data. It does it in all of these different ways. And like many classes, like any technique, it has its strengths and weaknesses, which I'm going to talk a little bit about right now. So one thing about machine learning that is truly a strength is it has the ability to scale human insight by analyzing patterns in large amounts of data. So for instance, if you gave me an image and asked me to tell you whether that image is a dog or a cat, I could probably tell you. If you gave me 10 images, I could do that too. But if you give me 1,000,000 images, I probably don't actually want to tell you that answer myself. And so this is where a machine learning algorithm can actually scalably answer that question for us. Machine learning is also good at optimizing complex systems by taking in a lot of data and contextualizing that and reanalyzing what that means for the system. Machine learning can be used to generate new data from old data. So do things like take satellite imagery, something that we can't necessarily use raw, but use that to instead think about where are the emissions and what is the extent of emissions on the planet, and actually turn that into data that we can use for further analysis. And then finally, a lot of new machine learning techniques have become very good at integrating with other methods. So for instance, if you have a climate model that is using physics in order to project what will happen to the climate, but then you also have data and observations you'd like to integrate into that climate model, there started to be ways to use machine learning to process the data, use the physics within the climate model, and sort of bridge these things together. So in general, machine learning is a really multi-purpose tool that can be used in a lot of circumstances where we do want to analyze some large scale of data, but it has its limitations. It's definitely not a technique that is useful or the right thing to use in every situation. So in particular, machine learning depends very much on the quality of the data that is available. So there's a common saying in machine learning that's called garbage in, garbage out, which is the idea that if you have very bad data, for example, data that's maybe missing a lot of entries or is coming from really noisy sensors or is generally very limited, then the quality of the insights that the machine learning algorithm can actually generate based on that data is not going to be good. And so it is really important that machine learning be used in situations where the data is actually good quality. And then in general, even if you have data that is good quality in the sense that nothing is really missing from it, or you have a lot of data, there are still other issues here, which is that if that data is biased, for example, if you have data that is more about one area of the world than another, then the machine learning algorithm is only going to know what's in that data. It's going to think that one area of the world implicitly is more important than the other area of the world because of the kind of data that exists. And so in general, machine learning inherits these biases and the data it gets, but also how we choose to design it and how we choose to use it. And as a result is not objective and inherits all of the biases associated with sort of the choices that we're making when we're both constructing data for it and actually using it in the real world. And then machine learning also, again, it picks up patterns in data, but it assumes that those patterns persist. That they, for example, if you analyze some data today about electricity usage in the COVID era, and then you try to use that machine learning algorithm to make some prediction about electricity usage in the future, it may not necessarily know that the future may look different, that hopefully we will be, for example, out of the COVID era. And so machine learning is basically not able to always deal with changes in the underlying patterns. And then finally, as you might have heard about statistical methods, machine learning that thinks about correlation, not causation. It can tell you whether two things are related, but generally it can't tell you whether one thing causes another. There are some new methods in machine learning and causal inference that are aiming to change this, but generally speaking, we're talking about correlation and not causation. Okay, so I've talked a bit about climate change. I've talked a bit about machine learning. Now, how are they related to each other? Okay, so there are actually a number of ways in which climate change and machine learning are related to each other. And so while in this talk, we're actually going to focus on one of those, I wanted to sort of set the stage and talk about all of these methods or all of these relationships so that, again, you're able to think about this problem holistically. So there are two classes of applications that really deal with how machine learning is used. So machine learning can be used in ways that reduce or respond to climate change. And this is something that my colleague David will go into just now after this slide. But there are also, unfortunately, applications that machine learning is used for that can increase greenhouse gas emissions. For instance, machine learning is often being used to accelerate the pace of oil and gas discovery. And this, as a result, increases the competitive advantage of oil and gas against renewables, and as a result leads to increased greenhouse gas emissions. And so while, again, in this talk, we're going to talk about positive applications of machine learning, or rather applications of machine learning that help us tackle climate change, it's worth understanding that machine learning is in some sense a general purpose tool, and as a result, we should be aware that it is being used in other ways as well. And then finally, in addition to the applications of machine learning, another area that we often think about is the emissions impacts of machine learning itself. What are the emissions associated with actually, for example, running or constructing a machine learning model? And so we often need to think about these considerations in the context of each other in order to make sure that machine learning is being used in the end in a way that overall helps us reduce or respond to climate change rather than actually contributing more to the issue. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to David to actually dive into various ways that machine learning can be used to tackle climate change.
Fantastic. Thank you, Priya. Let's get started talking about particular ways that machine learning can be useful in climate change mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change adaptation, so responding to the effects of climate change. So the first overarching theme that we see in many different ways of applying machine learning is in forecasting. So proactive planning and scheduling. This often is based upon time series data. For example, given what has happened over the past year, the 2 years before that, 3 years before that, and so on, what will happen this coming year, or what will happen this coming day based upon what's happened over the previous days. That's what predictions from time series data mean. Now, where does this come in handy? In many different situations. Nowcasting for solar and wind power. Solar and wind are renewable energy sources which are variable. So the amount of sun, the amount of wind is going to change from day to day and even from minute to minute. And it's really important if we are relying increasingly upon solar and wind power to know exactly how much will be generated so that the lights don't go out for anybody, so that there always is enough power there. And so very fine level forecasting is something that's very important as we increasingly rely upon solar and wind power, and machine learning can be really impactful in being a part of nowcasting systems. Likewise, forecasting can be really important for agricultural yield. Increasingly with climate change, we're seeing droughts and flooding that affect the extent of agricultural productivity and can potentially lead to famines. Governments and other decision makers really have a need for this kind of information, and so machine learning can be very useful to them in making these kinds of predictions. And likewise, predicting hurricanes and other extreme events that are becoming more frequent and more severe as a result of climate change can be really impactful. The second theme that we see in machine learning being applied to have an impact on climate change is remote sensing. And the need here is really filling data gaps. Particularly in many parts of the world, there are kinds of data that just aren't available for decision makers. For example, what the structure of the electrical grid is. Where is power being generated? How much? Where is it being sent? Where are buildings? How much energy are those buildings using? And so on. in order to inform regulations and decisions, it is really important to have these kinds of data. And sometimes one can get this kind of data from another sort of data, specifically satellite or aerial images. And so taking this sort of very large-scale data, automatically processing it, and being able to spit out different kinds of information can be really useful. So for example, to track greenhouse gas emissions, where are emissions being generated? For example, methane leaking from a natural gas pipeline or from a factory. Gathering infrastructure data, as I mentioned, where are the buildings, what are their footprints, how much energy are they probably consuming? Pinpointing deforestation as it happens in real time so that law enforcement can be sent to hopefully prevent as much deforestation as happening. Evaluating coastal flood risk, working out exactly where a city is likely to be under threat from rising sea levels and from storm surges caused by extreme weather that becomes more likely with climate change. So in all these different situations, we see machine learning, in particular computer vision, as being really important in converting data from one form, satellite or aerial imagery, to another form that can be useful. Improving efficiency. Machine learning systems are very good at efficiently operating a complicated system and controlling that system more effectively than perhaps a human could do. So this turns up in, for example, consolidating freight, making sure that freight is being transported and integrated across different transportation systems in the most efficient way possible, making sure that trains and trucks and boats are being used maximally efficiently, and that there is efficient use of the more low carbon modes of transportation. Controlling heating and cooling systems efficiently. So within individual buildings, making sure that there is less energy being used, as little energy as possible, in order to heat and cool that building effectively. Often a machine learning can do a more efficient job than a person can. And reducing food waste is a very big one. There's a lot of food wasted around the world, and this leads to a huge amount of energy being consumed, as well as other things, other resources that need to be consumed if this food is just going to be wasted, making sure that the amount of food that is produced and distributed is matching up with demand by appropriately forecasting demand and efficiently running supply chains is really important, and that's something that machine learning can be useful for. And then finally, accelerated experimentation. So for example, Thomas Edison famously tried 10,000 or so different materials before settling on carbon fiber as a useful material for the light bulb. Now there are various other materials being used, but it was really important to try a lot of different things and really experiment on many different materials. And we still have a need to experiment on many different materials in order to design effective materials for a whole range of uses. And machine learning can be useful in speeding up that process by recommending particularly good experiments to try. Machine learning is not a replacement for experimentation in science, but it can be useful in automating the process of human intuition and suggesting useful materials to try for better batteries to store renewable energy, lower emissions construction materials so that we don't use so much energy producing cement and steel, making fertilizer more efficiently, which also produces a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and designing sorbents, which are essentially chemical sponges that can soak up carbon dioxide from the air and use that potentially that can be used as part of carbon capture and sequestration systems. Now, I want to emphasize here that machine learning is not a silver bullet. It is not going to magically solve climate change. And this is for several reasons. First, it's not applicable everywhere. There are many problems and domains relevant to climate change where machine learning is completely not useful. And where it is useful, it's only going to be one part of the strategy. So for example, people talk about smart buildings, which are able to adapt their energy usage based upon what people are using them, what people are in them, and so on. That is a great use of machine learning, but far more impactful than that is just insulating buildings properly so that they don't leak heat to the outside needlessly. So sometimes the quick and dirty and stupid solution is much more impactful than the machine learning fancy solution. And in every case, it is really important to work with people who understand the problem to make sure you're working on to make sure you are integrating into the efforts that are already being done to solve that problem. Impactful applications are also often not the flashy ones. It's really important to remember that something like self-driving cars while it sounds really sexy, is not necessarily the way to actually have the maximal impact on the climate. Self-driving cars might actually make climate, but there's considerable numbers of people who think they may make it worse. Predictive maintenance, working out where a pipeline is going to leak and repairing it there, is probably much more impactful, even though it is less flashy. And then finally, again, problems need to be driven by end users. They need to be driven by the people who actually understand this area and have expertise and are on the ground working on it. They should not be driven by people who have some expertise in machine learning and think they know what's right for the rest of the world. So bearing in mind those caveats, what can you do listening to this talk? How is this relevant to you potentially? Our advice to you would be to learn about different ways to get involved in climate change. And that does not necessarily involve AI or machine learning. Sometimes, maybe you want to work on machine learning and AI and climate change, but maybe you want to work on climate change in some other way. There are so many different ways to be involved. And it's really that leverages your particular skills. Certainly, the particular path that we're talking about here is one that we found useful to us. I know I'm coming from a background in machine learning and AI, so it was a natural thing for me to be thinking about, but there are more impactful ways to be working on climate change, so no need to be working on machine learning here. Regardless of how you're working on climate change, make sure that what you do is actually helping. Don't just build solutions in isolation and then hope that they get used to save the world. Spend time really understand how you can be impactful and talking with the people who are on the ground, understanding the problems and solutions that are already being implemented. There's a lot of great work out there, and becoming a part of it there are many different ways to do that. And I encourage all of you to think about integrating into existing solutions rather than trying to come up with the magic bullet that solves everything, though that would be nice. So if you're interested specifically in machine learning and AI as it relates to climate change, Priya and I are chairs of an initiative called Climate Change AI, which provides resources for those who are interested in this space. You can go to climatechange.ai, our website, to learn more. We have more readings, data sets to play around with, videos of talks on these topics, and a lot more. So I encourage you to check that out if you are interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. David and Ms. Priya, for the extremely informative presentation. We are extremely grateful to you for having created this video for us. We will now move on to Ms. Lakshmi Aragappan, a GIIS alumnus from the CBSE 2015 graduating cohort. She is a Bachelor's of Science Honours Computational Biology graduate from the National University of Singapore, NUS, with a minor in Analytical Chemistry. She is currently pursuing an industrial PhD program as a full-time employee of an agro-biotech company named Wilma International. She juggles doing her PhD research in artificial intelligence at the NUS School of Computing. Ms. Lakshmi, we're extremely glad to have you here with us. Over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to meet you here and share my experience with computational biology with all of you. I thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to talk with you and share my experience with you today. So I will share my screen. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about computational biology and interdisciplinary approach to research. So if any of you is interested to connect with me later, you can do so via LinkedIn. So she already gave me an introduction, but just to quickly introduce myself again. So I did PCMB in CBSE and I graduated out of GIIS in 2015. And then I went on to do my undergraduate in NUS, and I majored in computational biology. And currently I am doing an industrial PhD program where I'm a student doing research in NUS, at the same time doing research in a company called as Wilmer. Okay, so what is computational biology? So we all know what is computer science and we all know what is biology separately, but what is computational biology? Like if you think about it in CBSE, you have a branch for computer science, you have a branch for biology. You know, at one point, nobody would have thought that these two things can actually come together. But yeah, so what is computational biology? It is basically like a really nice integration of both computer science and biology, and I'll explain what is that via this presentation. So as you can see in this Venn diagram, you can see stats, computer science, and biology, and all of them, when they are intermingled with each other in different forms, you have a lot of different domains. In general, bioinformatics and computational biology are almost interchangeably used in many areas. So we're talking about research, right? And in computational biology, what happens is that the concepts of biology help to expand research in computer science, and the concepts and the tools that you use in computer science helps to expand the research in biology. So how does that work? So let me talk about how concepts of biology can actually help the expansion of computer science research. So there's this concept called as DNA data storage. So we do know that data in computer science is stored as zeros and ones in the binary format, but there is research going on as to, is it possible to actually store data in DNA? Because DNA has ATGC, so is it possible to actually convert our, let's say, photographs or some sort of words and store it into DNA? So that is something that is in research. So you can actually think about how the biological concept and how DNA can be used as a form of storage. And we also have many algorithms in computer science that are like inspired from biological concepts. There's an algorithm called as genetic algorithm, and you also have a concept of neural networks. So genetic algorithm is inspired from the evolution theory, and the neural networks is inspired from the brains and the neurons. So a lot of research in computer science is inspired from biological concepts. And similarly, a lot of research in the biology greatly benefits from computer science concepts. And it is, you can actually see how the power of computing really helps to drive biological research forward. And I have a few examples to illustrate that in detail. So I will go into that now. So the previous presentation that we just saw actually explained machine learning really well with a lot of examples. But I would just like to give a small example of what exactly the machine is learning before I go into the rest of my presentation. So we all must have played this game of 20 questions where, you know, like you ask questions and then you try to find out who the other person is thinking. So let's say that the question is, am I a girl or a boy? And then you ask the person, do you have eyes? And if they say yes, does that give you any clue about whether the person is a girl or a boy? It really doesn't, because the girls also have eyes, the boys also have eyes. If you ask them a question, do you have hands? And then they say yes, does that also give you a clue as to whether the person is a girl or a boy? It doesn't. But if you ask the question, do you have long hair? And if they say yes, it is most likely a girl. I mean, yes, of course, there are girls who have much shorter hair, and there are also guys who have longer hair. But this gives you an inclination towards whether the person is a girl or a boy. So what the machine is actually doing is that the machine has tons and tons of data, and it looks into all of this data, and it tries to learn the features that helps it to differentiate a girl or a boy in this case. So for a different question, the machine will try to learn features that actually helps it to answer that particular question. So that's what the machine is trying to do. So once the machine learns all of this on the data that it has, it is ready. And once the machine is ready, you can use this machine on a new set of data. It's just like how you can go to an exam and write an exam. So once you have learned everything at home, you're going to an exam and writing an exam. Similarly, the machine, once it learns everything, it can actually go and you can use it on a new set of data to do predictions, to do analysis, to come up with new things. So that's just a short example of what the machine is actually learning. It is actually trying to learn these features. Yeah. So I'm going to give a few examples. So the data that here I'm showing is actually a picture, right? But pictures in essence are also numbers. You can actually all of these, this would just look like a matrix with every single color here would just be represented as a number from 0 to 1. So all data are actually numbers. You can convert them into numbers. So even though this is a picture, the domain is called as computer vision, and you can use the computer vision techniques to convert all of the the pictures into numbers, and you can use these in your machine learning algorithms. And it can be something as simple as your y is equal to mx plus c that you have learned in your school, or it can be something really complicated like a neural network. So you can use any of these machine learning techniques to handle data. So here, this is actually an image of like a microscope image of a cell. So there are many cells, right? And in labs, in biology labs, what they usually do is that once they get a slice of this image, there is a requirement to count the number of cells, because it's important, to see, okay, how many cells are there? Are the cells growing at the right pace? So you have to count the number of cells. And what traditionally you do is that you will put a grid and you will count the number of cells in one grid, and you would just basically kind of extrapolate it to come up with like a rough estimation of the number of cells that's present. So this is the manual way of doing it. But when you have the powerful machines and machine learning and artificial intelligence and all of that in your hand, you can actually automate it. And you can actually make the machine learn how to count the number of cells, so that in future, when you have an image like this, the machine would be able to tell you how many cells are there in this figure in like just in few seconds. So this was one of the projects that I did in my NUS, one of the modules in NUS. So this is another example of how you can combine computer science machine learning to help in the biology and the biological research. So this is actually just a figure, like an MRI scan, and the green is actually outlining the tumor. So this form of research is called as the segmentation in the computer vision problems. They call it segmentation. You're trying to segment out the region of the tumor, but it is not very easy. So if you have a figure like this, it is very easy to segment the flower out, correct? But if you have a figure like this, it's not so easy to segment the figure out, because the figure is not like as dark as this. You have a gradient where some place is darker and some place is lighter. So you might end up just assuming the dark portion to be your tumor, but rather you have the entire thing, right? So they call this the inhomogeneous images, where the image is not like plain black, but rather you have, grays, a lot of different shades of gray. So it becomes a bit difficult to actually find where the tumor is. And you have a lot of these machine learning and neural network algorithms, which you can use and develop to identify these tumors. And of course, something like this, when you develop, it's not going to completely replace your doctor. But the thing is, once you go to the hospital and get a scan, the computer will already be able to do some pre-analysis and present it to the doctor who's analyzing it by hand. So it'll be like an aid to the doctor. So you can develop methods like this. And yeah, so I did a project like this as a part of my internship in A*STAR. And not just images. So if you see, this is slightly inclined towards chemistry, where so if you have any sample, like let's say any sort of oil, like sunflower oil or olive oil, it can be anything. If you take a small sample of that and run it through spectroscope, NIR spectroscope, you can actually see that you would end up with a wave like this. And for different types of oils, you'll actually have a slightly different looking wave, but you can't differentiate it with your eyes. It's not easy. The differences are so minute, you won't be able to do it with your eyes. So you can actually build these machine learning models to actually differentiate these different types of oils based on machine learning just by analyzing these data. You can also, there are also many different ways in which you can actually see like the percentage of impurities in the oil or any sort of sample just by building these machine learning models, because you can't really figure that out with your eyes, right? So these kind of techniques really help so to ensure that you get these results really quickly. And this is something that I'm working on right now as a part of my PhD program. So the three examples that I gave right now are examples of how machine learning and artificial intelligence interacts with biology. So the machine learning, artificial intelligence are common concepts. So in the previous presentation, we saw that they had used that concept in a climate change, correct? But I showed a few examples where those same concepts can be used for a biological or a chemistry domain set of data. But in computational biology, that's not all what it is. You actually have a few really specific applications where computational biology really comes and is really important. So in biology, the major source of data that you get is DNA, RNA, and protein. And once sequencing became a huge thing, and you can actually get your own data sequenced for DNA sequenced for like about $1,000. So we have a huge improvement in the domain of next generation sequencing. And it is very important to tackle this with the aid of computer science to do better in the biological research. So all of you must be knowing the central dogma, DNA to RNA to protein. So when you want to actually analyze something with the humans, let's say cancer or something, you can analyze it at any stage. You know, you can analyze the DNA, you can analyze the RNA, you can analyze the protein. So it is the choice of the researcher. And for every, like whatever choice you make, you have many technologies available in the market. And with every technology comes a lot of different advantages and disadvantages. And as we all know, DNA, RNA, and all of these are very, very long strings. And usually when they sequence it, they are actually breaking it down into small chunks and they're sequencing it parts by part. So there's also the problem of how to align all of them back together, how to stitch them all back together. And for all of this, computational biology and the use of computing techniques really helps. So I will just illustrate a few examples of how NGS helps. So usually people use the next generation sequencing to do diagnosis and to identify like important genes that is in your body, and so that you can do a targeted therapy. So just a small example here where you can see all of these are different genes and these are all different patients. And you can see that for these set of patients, the first 5 patients, their pattern of the genes is like this. And you can assume that purple means that they have a lot of this gene and like it's highly expressed, and blue means that it's not that much expressed. So for this set of pattern, you can see that it's a benign type of tumor, which means that it is in one place, it doesn't move around. And you have these other set of patients where they have a malignant tumor and they have a different pattern of genes. So once you come up with a gene profile of the patient like this, you can actually kind of predict and make a diagnosis for the new patient. So if you get a gene profile of the new patient and the new patient has a gene profile like this, you can compare it with what you already know and kind of predict what type of tumor they have. So to come and arrive at this gene profile from just the sequence to the gene profile, there are a lot of steps involved. And all of those steps require computational biology. So like there are lots of pipelines available, and you have to clean it, you have to normalize it. There are lots of steps. And for all of that, the use of computing is really, really helpful. And you can also see that once you identify some important genes, you can use these information to target that gene and to develop a drug or some sort of therapy to tackle cancer. So NGS analysis is really helpful in that sense. And also NGS analysis allows you to identify patterns or biomarkers which makes you susceptible to a particular disease. And one of the famous example is that it was predicted that people with BRCA mutation will develop breast cancer. And like, I'm not sure how many of you know, but because Angelina Jolie got the BRCA1 test positive, she decided to take a preventative measure of removing her breast. So basically, how did they arrive at this? How did they find out that it was this mutation that makes you susceptible to breast cancer? Because of all of these NGS analysis that they did with the help of computational biology. So this is another example of computational biology where you can do things called as pathway modeling. So once you find out, okay, this gene is important, because of this gene, you know, you're having cancer. Once you identify these things, you want to do targeted therapy, right? So for example, this is the DNA, and let's say this gene is the one that is responsible for cancer. So you can see all of these are different proteins, okay? And this is the surface of the cell, and this is your nucleus. So what happens is that you're giving this part of the protein is actually sending signal, and that signal, like a dominoes effect, is being carried out. And finally it reaches here, and this gives the instruction, okay, now you can divide, the cell can divide. So if the cell continues to divide without any sort of monitoring, it means that there's going to be cancer, the cell is going to continue to divide. So you don't want that, it needs to be monitored, right? But in a case, let's say that the person has cancer and it is going on dividing without any monitor, what you want to do is that there's an instruction that's being flowed, right, in a form of dominoes effect. You want to block that instruction somewhere. So you want to create drugs that will block that instruction somewhere here. And there are thousands of combinations of drugs that you can try. It can block in different areas. So is it possible for you to create a drug, get a patient, and do a clinical trial on that patient every single time before you decide this drug is okay or not? You can't do that, right? That's not practical. So what computational biology really helps you to do is to narrow down these choices. So you can actually, you know, model this entire pathway in using ordinary differential equations and using logic equations, basically a lot of mathematical stuff. And once you have this equation modeled, you can simulate what happens in real life in your computer. And you can find out which drug is good, which drug is bad, what this drug does, what this drug does. And once you have an idea, and once you narrow down your choices, then you can proceed on to a clinical trial where you actually have real life patients, and you can try your predictions on those patients to see if it really works or not. Yeah, so I hope I gave you an idea of the different domains in computational biology and what can be done and what's roughly out there. This is, of course, not everything, but this is what I shared with you guys today. So hope you guys enjoyed. And if we have time, I would love to take questions. How do I take questions? Okay, I think that's about it.
If you have any questions, you can put it in the question box below. Thank you, Ms. Lakshmi. It is really encouraging to see students from our school go on to do such fascinating research. Your talk was indeed very insightful. We will now move on to our third guest speaker, Mr. Chandra Kumar, an ambitious and accomplished man focused on creating a better digital future for organizations through his startup ventures in digital transformation, artificial intelligence, and digital marketing. Trained as a consultant, he has a unique 23-year background in strategy, market making, business development, and program management of complex tech projects ranging up to $1 billion. Previously, he was the CTO at Dell EMC, transformation leader at IBM,
and client partner with Cognizant. He has been a recipient of the Gold Award for Digital Transformation Initiatives and Global Best Sales Team Member. He teaches in-demand courses in artificial intelligence, blockchain, digital marketing, and CRM across Singapore, India, and other countries. He also has prestigious certifications in AI, strategy, leadership, and innovation management. We're delighted to have him here today. So without further ado, I will pass the session over to Mr. Chandra Kumar.
Hi, good morning. Can I start sharing my screen?
Yes, sir.
I think you'll have to promote me as a panelist to share the screen.
Sir, are you able to try now?
Give me a second. Okay, I hope you can see my video and I'm about to share my screen. Just give me a second. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so thank you so much for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to talk with the GIIS students, the faculty, principal. I'm also a faculty. I teach artificial intelligence to our school students in Singapore and also in the India GIIS schools. I would like to keep it quite simple today. I guess there's a lot of AI, a lot of biotechnology work which has been displayed till now. Fantastic. I've been also been learning quite a bit in the past 30 minutes or so. So essentially, I would like to talk about what are the implications of artificial intelligence in tackling climate change. For those of you who do not know us, I am the founder and CEO of a company called Wisely Wise from Singapore. And without further ado, let's look at what is the impact of artificial intelligence. Now, before we get started, I would want each of you to think about one question. Does AI change our lives in a positive way or in a negative way, or do you feel neutral about this? Because the question, whenever a new technology comes up, whenever there is a new industrial revolution which comes up, it's always whether it is going to change our lives, and we are always afraid whether it will be in a negative way, right? In terms of my experience with students till now, the students have always been very positive. It's shown up in the way that they have trained themselves in artificial intelligence, in the way that they have gone ahead and designed artificial intelligence applications. And we do this right from the third standard onwards. So I'm pleasantly surprised about the social thinking, the responsibility that students have shown. So AI will definitely change our lives in a very positive way. Do you know that more Indians actually die cleaning sewers than fighting terrorists in Kashmir? Sounds quite tragic, right? Essentially, what we are looking at is that we are focusing on a lot of problems. We are definitely looking at a lot of headlines, but some of the problems, including climate change, are something that we are just not neglecting, and which is pretty much not really good for the long run. Providing some statistics, right? This particular job is called the deadliest job in India. The statistics are quite alarming. One worker dies every 5 days, and there are millions of workers across India who are actually being exposed to toxic gases, infectious diseases, and of course, there's the social stigma around this particular job. Now, while this is also in a way related to the climate, the people, the artificial intelligence, none of us really did anything about it. But I would like to point you out to a set of students who actually created an AI robot called Bandicoot, and their whole vision was changing manhole to robohole. And the statistics, which are quite heartwarming, are that this particular robot can clean a manhole in 20 to 45 minutes compared to 3 hours by a worker. and it can actually clean about 250 manholes in a month. So it basically means this set of students are using AI to saving lives, which is what I would want each of you on this call to start thinking about in terms of AI, which is being called as the industrial revolution. Are we just going to use it for fun purposes as robots which can serve as food, or drones which can actually take photographs? Or are we going to use it to tackle much larger problems? Are we supposed to be inspired by this set of students and look at how we can actually improve our climate for a better future? So in fact, when we teach AI, we make it a point. I've just marked it in red here. When we talk about artificial intelligence in society, we talk about AI, bias, ethics, what does the government do for AI? And of course, we talk about climate change as well in a big way. So essentially, I heard some of the speakers talk about AI. So I'm sure there's a lot of technical knowledge about AI which has been imparted till now. So fundamentally, I would like to refresh. So AI is essentially intelligence demonstrated by machines, right? It's in contrast to the natural intelligence that each of us display. And typically, we classify the various applications either as conversational artificial intelligence, natural language processing, machine learning, which includes everything from deep learning, computer vision, and of course, in terms of robotics. And while we see a lot of things like driverless cars or self-driving cars as more as fancy technology, we will also in a quick second see how this actually contributes for a better climate change. And I would like to draw your attention to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, right? And we have a lot of goals under that. We specifically, for the purpose of this presentation, let's look at goal 30, which is around climate action. We know, based on the work which has been done by the various committees under the UN, that the average global temperature has actually risen up by about 0.85 degrees centigrade. Oceans have warmed, the amount of snow and ice have diminished, and sea levels are rising, which puts under risk many countries, including Singapore, Maldives, some of the well-known countries which face risk because of the sea level rising. We are also, of course, quite exposed in terms of the problems due to emissions of greenhouse gases and the temperature increasing, and consequently, what's the impact on human beings. We also are looking at that not only are emissions growing, they are also growing much faster in the previous decade as opposed to the decades much earlier. So we are actually looking at how do you really have a sustainable society developing over a period of time, and whether AI could potentially be a solution for this. It cannot be the be all and end all, because we also have to look at things like our personal consumption, but we are also looking at saying larger problems can be solved using artificial intelligence. Now, without a direction, of course, AI can go in, any sort of solution. So we will look at the specific targets which have been set out over here. So essentially, we are looking at how we can integrate climate change measures into national policies. How do you improve awareness, education around climate change? How do you actually implement the various commitments taken by the various developed country parties? How do we promote mechanisms for raising capacity for climate change related planning and management, right? While these are very well established targets for goal 13 under the Sustainable Development Goals, we will look at whether AI can actually help us in meeting these targets, and why AI is very well suited for this particular global issue. Okay, so I'm going to look at several ways as to how AI can help tackle climate change. We are looking at that there are 5 territories for technological innovations. One is in terms of power and electricity generation, fundamentally because these account for about 25% of all greenhouse emissions. We look at transportation as the next sector, because this represents 23% of all global related carbon dioxide emissions. Then food and its supply chain represents 25% of global emissions. We are also looking at the newer sort of studies where we say that instead of meat-based burgers, if we have a plant-based burgers, it generates a whopping 90% less greenhouse emissions, 46% less energy, and 99% less impact on water scarcity, and 93% less impact on land use. Next, we look at manufacturing as the next sector, fundamentally because this represents 30% of global related carbon dioxide emissions. And of course, buildings and cities where we live, they represent 20% of global emissions, right? Now, what happens when we use AI and why AI is a good candidate, fundamentally answering my own question that I posed a few minutes back. AI is obviously running measurement and predictions on steroids. While we do have a lot of software and automation till now, what AI really helps us do is it helps us look at data in different patterns, huge volumes of data, real-time data, and it also allows us to slice and dice the data in multiple ways to analyze that, classify, predict, and it allows us to come out with much more significant insights, right? And of course, we look at cognitive superpowers that AI brings in terms of computer vision and other things in terms of what we can call seeing, hearing, reading, and understanding. So we are going to use remote sensing data to really look at what sort of various AI solutions can actually be brought for climate change. So let's look at quickly about 10 examples of the AI use cases. One, we can build better client models. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is using AI to build better predictions of extreme weather events like hurricanes. And we look at how we can increase monitoring, measuring, and accountability of pollutants. So AI is being used to automatically analyze data from IoT sensors and also use the remote sensing data to identify pollutants such as ground level ozone. We also can use AI to optimize traffic flow and make smarter cities. Now, a simple example of that is the study in India by McKinsey, which states that smart rubbish bins are being trialed so that the rubbish trucks do not pick up if the bins are not 75% full. This means lesser emissions due to the trucks not running and only having a very, very cost effective and a more efficient way of picking up these various rubbish bins. It can be used to improve building energy consumption because intelligent AI can measure, predict, and control heating and cooling systems. So this can actually achieve significant energy savings, double-digit energy savings, as you can see in this particular paragraph. In fact, we see that companies like Google and Facebook are aggressively looking at how they can have what you can call more as being carbon neutral companies over the next decade or so. We also look at how AI can help roll out autonomous trucks because this can help attain a 15% reduction in fuel consumption over human operators. We just saw a slide of the driverless cars, and if we can apply the same principles to get autonomous trucks on the roads, this can actually help us in reducing the fuel consumption, reducing in terms of the trucks life on the roads in the sense that we can use them for much longer periods. We also look at how AI can help better match electricity supply and demand. So this ensures again that the value of the electricity is increased. So for example, Google's DeepMind, the AI, has actually developed a network system which increases the value of wind power by more than 20%. So making energy being very optimal is quite key in terms of being successful in climate change. The seventh one is in terms of improving efficiency of logistics and supply chain. So increasingly AI is being used to look at what are the various demand levels which are happening in international supply chain. Of course, in the event of COVID, we are seeing supply chains getting disrupted. We may see more of local supply chains as opposed to international supply chain. In either of the cases, whether we look at local supply chains or international supply chains, we would see that AI will be used by most companies in terms of predicting the accuracy with which to selling products, delivering the products, and of course, ensuring that the last mile logistics are covered using AI. Now, these are not small problems which can be solved manually, and these are also not problems which can be solved using existing automation, for example, using ERP systems. We can only use powerful systems like AI to actually tackle this sort of efficiency problems. The eighth one is in terms of optimizing the food supply chain and improving agricultural yields. We see that the example of Microsoft working with Indian farmers to achieving up to 30% higher yields using machine learning advice. Essentially, the advice banks on what would be the best time to sow crops and whether that will lead us to better yields and higher yields for these various farm crops. The ninth one is in terms of improving manufacturing efficiency by analyzing and improving manufacturing processes. So in the example of turbine combustion, we could make it more efficient, we could reduce errors and energy wastage on the production line. And of course, we could use advanced robotics for improving production efficiency. The 10th one and the final one, which I'm going to share now, is in terms of how do we help consumers reduce their carbon footprint, right? I'm sure each of us use various tracker devices, including our smartphone, in terms of what is our usage of, let's say, our smart devices, whether our battery is being fully charged. But going a bit further, we can also use AI, where we can look at what is our carbon footprint, right? The picture that you see on screen is based on a short film by Anne Catherine Bayer, who imagined a world, right, where each of us are allotted credit points, that is environment credit points based on our behavior and its impact on sustainability. So this could also be at a grassroots level that AI can give us enormous feedback via our smartphone devices or maybe other IoT devices, based on which we can take our calls in terms of reducing the carbon footprint. So does technology alone provide all the answers? Does AI alone provide all the solutions? Now the answer is, of course, technology alone will not be enough. And I don't think it's also responsible enough for us to only depend on AI. So we also have to individually look at what is our consumption pattern. How do we actually look at what is it that we eat, how we travel, and how we live? So for example, the companies that I used to work in, we used to have posters in our canteen which used to say, take what you eat and eat what you take. So essentially guiding the employees in terms of not wasting food, and at the same time not encouraging to eat everything on the plate as well, to reduce obesity levels. We also have to, of course, look at more in terms of governmental policies, regulatory policies, and also in terms of accords like the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. We also have to look at what are the financial incentives which are out over there. What is a better type of capitalism, as what has actually been mentioned by the World Economic Forum. So in essence, we have seen what is AI, why AI is a very good candidate to tackle climate change. We looked at the 10 specific ways in which AI can tackle climate change. We also looked at what are the additional factors that we have to take into consideration apart from artificial intelligence type technology solutions to manage climate change. So I hope I have given you a more concise and more holistic view of AI and the part it plays in climate change. For those of you who are quite interested in terms of going into each of the 10 points and looking at saying that, can I gain the technology knowledge as to how this AI is impacting climate change, I would recommend the white paper out here. Maybe I can share the link. This is actually a white paper around how do you tackle climate change with machine learning. It takes into consideration multiple factors in terms of electricity systems, transportation, buildings and cities, the areas that I just covered in my presentation, and also looks at specifically what are the various technologies, how they come together holistically to address these various facets of climate change. So with that, I will end my presentation. I will take any questions if they are from the audience.
We have a question from a participant in S604. We request you to post it in the Q&A box below.
You want the, I'm sorry, I didn't see the question.
Mr. Chandrakumar, we request you to address the question in the Q&A box below.
Okay, let me just see this. I don't see any open questions right now.
Okay, we don't have any questions as of now. As in when the questions come into the Q&A box, we request to answer them. So thank you, Mr. Chandrakumar. Your endless knowledge and expertise was valuable to hear. Our final speaker for the symposium is Ms. Bisakha Das, who is also a GIS alumnus, currently a sophomore data science and artificial intelligence student at NTU Singapore. She is now interning at AON Center for Innovation and Analytics as a risk software intern, and we now welcome her onto the board.
Hi, my name is Vishakha. And I would like to talk to you about venturing into AI. So first, a little bit about myself. I finished IB in GIIS in 2018, and I am currently majoring in data science and artificial intelligence in NTU. I'm also working as a research intern in A-STAR, working on advanced robotics application under the WSTP program. So I'll get into more details about this program and my course a little while later. Firstly, let's see what is artificial intelligence. So we humans are decent enough smart creatures. Some of us can do cool actions like, seeing things, speaking, more importantly, listening, which I hope some of you are doing right now. But when an AI system does the same actions, or at least attempts to do the same actions, it is not as simple for them as it is for us. Actually, instead of me explaining, why don't we see what an AI system thinks AI is? So what we're using here is a natural language processing API released by OpenAI called GPT-2. And once it loads, we'll know what it thinks about AI. Okay, so it is quite possible that artificial intelligence will exist, but it is not clear whether after its inception it would function in reality. According to several researchers, there were already some examples of such AI technologies that people could not imagine that allowed for this kind of sight. The ideology for this sort of AI would be the solution instead. Okay, not bad. This gave us quite a decent answer, but with an improved model called GPT-3, which got released a couple days back, it seems to be much more accurate. However, it is not widely distributed as an API as of now, so we just have to wait for that to happen and then we will be able to use that. Moving on, let's see what AI actually is. So AI is a subset of computer science. The basic objective of it is to enable computers to act intelligently by, for example, making decisions, solving problems, and understanding human language. So understanding human speech is known as speech recognition, and the ability to write, read, or understand texts is the field of natural language processing. Now, these are just two small examples. The actual power of AI, if reduced to a simple Venn diagram, would look something similar to this. It's not all that simple, and there are multiple paths. So from what we can make out, deep learning is a part of machine learning, which is a part of AI. The parts that we were talking about before, NLP and speech recognition, are in fact a part of something much larger. Precisely why it was necessary to make it its own bachelor's degree instead of a specialization. Data Science and Artificial Intelligence or DSAI in NTU is a new course which was introduced in 2018. So primarily, our batch would be the first to graduate. As I said before, in today's era, it was highly necessary for data science and AI to have its own bachelor's program instead of sharing into computer sciences degree. This course allows you to be specialized in DSAI right from the beginning and get an understanding of what it encompasses of. So, this course gives you an all-rounded understanding of the three main aspects required to study DSAI. Firstly, data science or AI is based on a fundamental understanding of mathematical concepts, especially linear algebra and statistics. Secondly, computation, of course. You will learn how to use data science methods and libraries for analysis and evaluation. NTU strikes a balance between the shared need to understand CS and maths by letting this course be jointly offered by SCSE and SPMS, which is School of Computer Sciences and Engineering and School of Physical and Mathematical Sciences. Okay, and thirdly is the practical approach. Now this is the most exciting approach because it lets us know the industry requirements. This includes internships and exchanges which we go on and are then able to connect our disciplinary knowledge with industry projects. So currently, I'm in WSDP, which is the Work Study Degree Program. This program basically allows a student to work in the industry alongside your undergraduate study. So under this program, I'm currently a robotics research intern at A-Star, and I will be working here for the next 2 years, which includes my professional internship and my final year project. So don't worry about a specialized course because you will still have plenty of career options. In fact, in today's world, every field requires data science and AI. My experience so far has been very insightful and it's been a really cool and powerful thing to get into. And I consider myself to be immensely lucky that NTU started this course in 2018, so it was like a perfect time for me to join. My coursework has honestly been a joy to undertake, and I have gotten good topics which are interesting to me both on a professional and a personal level. Okay, so that's all talk. Let's get into something more exciting. Something that we all like to do. So, something that we all like to do is text people, right? Something even more interesting is finding out what other people are texting each other. So, that's exactly what we are going to do today. I will let you guys take a look at my WhatsApp. Except, not exactly. What we are going to be looking at today, is some text message analysis that I did for a chat between me and a friend of mine. So I've extracted and cleaned our WhatsApp chats over the past 1 year, and they look something like that. So we were talking about some Bollywood dance thing, but let's not get into that for now. Okay, so the first message is the message telling us that our chats are encrypted. So beyond that, we can analyze everything else. Let's get started with finding out every information we can about our chats. And trust me, I am not kidding when I say that we can find literally anything and everything. Starting with simple things like who sent how many texts. So yeah, okay, I think we have texted each other quite a bit in the last year. We can also find out which days we texted maximum. And yeah, I was expecting the weekends to have the like the maximum number of texts, but turns out Saturday is the least. So well, I'll let her know we should text more often on Saturday then. Also, we can find out things about like which emojis were most often used. So, okay, we have used the heart most often, which is great. Mhm. Okay, yeah, not just numeric evaluations, we can also draw up some nice charts. This one is showing the most frequent time of the day when we texted each other. So 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., which makes sense because we text each other right before class starts. Like, hey, hi, where are you? Are you coming? And then once at the end of the day. We barely text from 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. because, well, we obviously sleep then. And yeah, we can also generate a word cloud of the most common words that we have used. So OMG, okay, oh, will are the largest over there. So let the numbers speak for themselves, right? They are the most used. Alright, so that was my analysis. But why should you study AI? Because this is where we are right now. There is a steep technological curve coming towards us, and we need to try our best to be prepared. It seems like a pretty intense place to be standing, but then you have to remember something about what it's like to stand on a time graph. You can't see what's to your right, and here is what it would actually feel like to stand here. And yeah, that looks pretty normal, right? Because it's a distorted view. So, as AI zooms upwards in an intelligence towards us, we'll see it as simply becoming smarter for an animal. And then when it hits the lowest capacity of humanity, we'll be like, oh, that's cute, it's like a dumb human. The only thing is, in the grand spectrum of intelligence, all humans, from an average dumb person to Einstein, are within a very, very small range. So just it'll suddenly be smarter than Einstein and we won't even know what hit us. It's a better option to lead the change than to do nothing and watch as it overwhelms all of us. And that's why you should study AI. Thank you for listening to this talk. I would be very happy to answer any questions you may have about the NTU curriculum or just about anything about life working in AI. So my LinkedIn is up there, and yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I hope you enjoyed this talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Visakha. Thank you so much, Visakha, for the wonderful session and giving us an insight into your field of expertise. We wish you all the very best. We wish you all the very best in all your future endeavors. There are a few questions which will be sent to Ms. Visakha later, and we'll get it addressed and let you know as soon as possible. With this, we have come to the end of our program today. We thank all our speakers for their time and for providing us with such valuable information. We're indeed very grateful to you for a very riveting and insightful session. We hope our viewers have gained much from this symposium, and we thank the management members of GIIS and our principal, Ms. Melissa Maria, for this wonderful opportunity and guidance in making this event a success. Thank you all once again, and have a great day ahead.